Hi, everyone. This is Real Life with Ruth McD, and I am your host, Ruth McD. So glad you're with us, and I am excited for today. We have a special guest with us who has been in the abortion arena in different ways, and she's going to be sharing her story with us. So if you know somebody who has been through the trauma of having an abortion or is thinking about it, and even a guy that has maybe not had his say in what he wanted, and you know that they're hurting and that they are being affected by what has transpired, whether it was 6 weeks ago or 60 years ago. I'm not joking. I have actually ministered to a lady in her 80s, actually two, and they both had the same concern, was that their life had been a torment since they were in their 20s when they'd had an abortion. Let your friends and your family know they need to listen to this show. We have with us Linda Keener Thomas. She is the co-founder and on the board of directors at National Memorial for the Unborn, and we are going to talk a little bit about this. I did not know that there was a memorial wall for the unborn. There is, and it's right here in our state of Tennessee. She's also the director, or has been the director, for Choices Pregnancy Center in Chattanooga. She leads post-abortion support groups and has been on many shows focused on the family, Moody's, Primetime America, the 700 Club, to name a few. So we are just really glad she has taken the time out to come and be with us today. Linda, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I'm excited to be here.
And I'm glad you're here too. You have an amazing story, not just the first part of your life, but God has done some incredible things for you, but also through you. And I'm so glad that we get to share that today.
Amen. He is an amazing God.
Yes, He is. Yes, He is. And He loves us so much.
Yes.
And He makes room for us and all the silly things and bad things and choices that we make in all areas of life. But we are going to talk today with you about abortion.
Yes.
It is so prevalent. 1 in 4, and you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but 1 in 4 women have had an abortion.
And that's probably conservative. We really don't know. And for every man,
Yep.
for every woman, there was a man. There's grandparents.
Yes.
There's aunts and uncles. It has rippled out. And I rarely meet someone that has not been impacted in some way by abortion.
Wow. And I think we try to keep it a secret, and we don't know all the details for that reason. And we don't know the trauma that actually comes about by having an abortion that can last, as I've already shared, a couple of women I've talked to, it's been 60 years.
Absolutely. We see that all the time. I was listening to a gal that does hospice care, and she said the number one regret on the deathbed for women is an abortion.
Really?
Often that they have told no one about their whole lives.
Oh, wow.
They carry it. We carry it. Yes.
Now, you are no stranger to this back years ago yourself.
Yes.
Now, you were a church girl, right?
I was a good Christian girl. My parents were believers and raised in the church. And sometimes that actually, in my case, contributes because we have that reputation to maintain.
Yeah.
And abortion promises to cover it up, and we don't have to face, sin in our lives. And just like King David, we choose murder to cover our sin.
The great cover up.
Yep.
So, what happened to you?
Well, at 19, I was an honor student in college and found out I was pregnant. And this was back in 1977, so it was just towards the beginning of Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
And I found out later that my mom had actually talked to my other sisters about abortion, but she didn't think I would ever need it, so she hadn't sat down and had that talk with me. But I did need it. Was very ambivalent, back and forth and back and forth. And I remember one weekend actually going home from college to tell my parents that I was pregnant, and I just couldn't get the words out of my mouth. And on the way back home, I stopped at an abortion clinic.
Oh, wow.
I don't even remember, where that thought even entered my head other than Satan.
Yeah.
But found out I was actually too far along to have a regular abortion in the clinic and had to wait a couple more weeks before I was far enough along to go into the hospital. And had a second trimester saline abortion at 22 weeks.
Wow. Now, in that 2 week period, was it a torment? I mean, was it, were you,
Torment.
yeah.
It was torment until, and many women I work with now will say this, because of the torment, you almost become numb. It's like we just shut down.
Yeah.
And for me, and for many women I've talked to, it's almost like you're watching somebody else walk in to have that procedure done.
Wow.
It's like even now the memories are very vague until they inserted that saline into my womb, and I began to feel my baby moving. Oh. And suddenly all the fog lifted, and I realized the reality of what I was doing.
And it was too late.
And it was too late. I begged them to stop, and they said, no, it's too late, and they gave me drugs to calm me down. And the next day, delivered my dead baby.
Oh, wow. So you had to spend a night there then
Yes,
as well.
that procedure is overnight. And I remember asking the nurse, isn't it a baby? And she said, no, honey, and you want to finish your college, don't you?
Really?
And I chose to believe that lie, even though I think I knew it was a lie. But I chose to believe it.
Now, did anybody know what you were doing at this point, or were you just strictly on your own?
My boyfriend was the one that took me. He actually was not for it, but men are just so robbed of their role to protect the unborn. And he said the thing that so many men say, whatever you want, I'll support you.
Yeah.
When really in our heart of hearts, what we want them to say is, no, this is our baby, we're going to make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they're told this line that they're supposed to say is I'll support you, whatever you decide. And so that was his take. And I actually found out years later how badly it had hurt him.
Oh.
At 19, I was very selfish. I was all about finishing college and having my career and all of these things. But years later, we were able to talk, and I asked his forgiveness. And he just broke down in tears and told me how bad that had hurt.
Wow.
And that he had never gone on to have other children because he thought he couldn't be a good father.
Oh, wow. So it really does affect the guys as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They show it different. They process it different. But it has been, I think, a major component in the emasculation of men in our country, because we've robbed them of their God-given role of protecting.
Yeah, we see that in a lot of areas. Never thought of it that way, however.
Yeah.
Wow. So after the abortion, once you had delivered the baby and you went home,
Yes.
how did things work out? Were you able to get over it?
Because mine was a fairly traumatic experience because of the type of abortion I had, it was not easy to stuff. Many of us stuff that thing, like you have said already, like a beach ball at the pool, keeping that thing underwater for years and years. It didn't take long for me to fall apart. I got permission to take an overload of college courses. I got a job. I just tried to stay busy. But that didn't work for very long at all. And I began to have nightmares, hearing my baby cry and searching for the baby that was crying and couldn't find it. And it wasn't just a few months, and I had dropped out of school. The one thing I'd had the abortion to save was my college career, and I ended up losing that, which is so true. Whatever it is that we make that sacrifice for usually ends up falling apart anyway. So dropped out of school, started using drugs and alcohol. Our self-esteem just goes through the floor. And it's almost like we want to punish ourselves. It's amazing. It's like we know God should strike us dead, but since he doesn't, we're going to punish ourselves. And so we get into bad relationships and, really fell apart for about a year.
Now, your parents, they're watching this.
They are.
Did they have any clue what was going on with you?
I think they did. Even though I hadn't told them, I think they did actually suspect. And actually, my mother confronted me at some point in there and asked me if I had an abortion. I just lied and said no.
Wow. She knew to ask.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So what happened? You are obviously struggling if you're doing drugs and, all these things that are not of your character.
Right.
What happened to make that turnaround? Did you have to wait decades?
No, no, it was just a matter of a couple of years after the abortion. And I was living with a bunch of people doing drugs, just, trying to stay numb. I guess it's the words in Ephesians, but God. And literally, I remember sitting around listening to Pink Floyd and getting that tap on the shoulder. And I knew that nobody was behind me, but it was so real that I turned around and looked.
Wow. Got your attention.
He did. He did. And he said, "You don't belong here. You don't belong here. You're mine." And I was like, "No, God, don't look at me. I've done too much.
Yep.
I'm running as fast as I can from him because of the guilt." And I'm like, "Don't look at
The
me.
shame.
I'm no longer worthy." And he spoke into my heart that, "Yes, you are. That you're mine.
Wow.
And I still love you." And so that started my journey back. And it wasn't without bumps and some difficulties, but he drew me back in. And within a year after that, I was at a very, very strict Bible school.
Wow.
And
That's a complete opposite.
It was like different lifestyle completely. But I fell in love with God's word and fell in love with him again. But what I was doing is I was still asking his forgiveness constantly.
Yeah.
So many women tell me, "But I can't forgive myself." And I understand that feeling because that's what you're doing is you're over and over again praying for forgiveness. And I remember in Western Canada, down on my knees by a wooden bunk bed, praying for the millionth time, "Lord, forgive me." And again, I heard his voice. Those are the 2 times really in my life that I almost audibly heard his voice. And this time, what he said was, "Linda, your sin caused your son to die, but your sin caused my son to die.
Wow. That's powerful.
And what Jesus did on the cross was enough." And I realized that by continuing to ask for forgiveness and trying to work for forgiveness, I was leading every Bible club and going out and doing prayer meetings and all of this stuff. What I was saying is that there was something that I could do that could add to the forgiveness that Jesus had already given me. And by continuing to ask, I was saying that what Jesus had done was not enough.
Yeah.
And so that settled in my heart forever, the question of forgiveness. I accepted. Thank you
That's so
for the
good.
forgiveness you have given me. And what Jesus did was enough, yes.
Wow. That's powerful, what you just said. Many of us in different areas of our lives struggle with that.
Sure.
But definitely I can see that with women who have had abortion because it's so, the gravity of it is so heavy that it's a life.
And when we say, "How could I? How could I?" So part of it is coming to grips with our sinfulness.
Yeah.
That's what confession is being able to really come to grips. I say to women all the time, to fully be able to appreciate the marvelous forgiveness of God, we first have to really fully appreciate the depth of our own sin.
Yes, that is so
And face
true.
it, and stop making the excuses that we, all the denial stuff that goes on, and just truly just lay it at his feet and say, with Paul, "I am the worst of sinners."
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. And how true is that? Community, the culture will say, "But you were busy, but it wasn't the right time, but..."
I wouldn't have been a good mom.
Yeah.
But maybe the baby would have been deformed. We come up with hundreds of buts.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we have yet to sit down and say, "God, I sinned." And I think that is huge in our culture, is that we have to take responsibility for what we've done and look it head on.
Yeah.
Because until we do, we can't deal with it.
Right.
That is powerful. This is such a good interview. The Lord is just all over this, and that is just powerful. I love that. So you did that.
Yes.
And then did you immediately go into ministry for women who had had abortions, or how did that come about?
I was like, "Okay, this is dead. This is done. I'm forgiven. I'm going to walk away, never look back." I did not have ministry in mind at all. But God is so patient and so kind and has such a sense of humor.
This is true. Yes.
I came back to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I was from, and there was a lady there. This is early 80s, really at the very beginning of the whole crisis pregnancy center movement. And she decided that she was going to start a pregnancy center in our town. And my parents, who at that point we had had reconciliation and confession, and they knew they had gone up to a little cemetery when they first found out. Again, God's sense of humor. I didn't tell them. They found out through my boyfriend, who thought they knew.
Oh.
Yeah. And so they confronted me, and I asked their forgiveness. I was in my healing process long enough that I could do that. And they had gone up to a little cemetery and had a little service, just the two of them, for their first grandchild.
Oh, that's precious.
It is precious. Grief is a major part of this healing. But anyway, they were going to put this little pregnancy center, and my dad had an office building and said that they could put it in there. And I was working in that building, and my mom would be counseling women, and she'd come and get me and say, Linda, please talk to her.
Oh.
I think you can make a difference because you've been through it.
Oh.
And I would say, no, I'm good. But she kept asking, and God kept moving, and eventually began to counsel, talk to women that were facing unplanned pregnancies, and then ended up being a director of a pregnancy center in Chattanooga for 10 years. And it just, God is such a redeeming God.
Oh, yes.
He does not waste our pain.
Yes.
When we surrender it to Him, He gives us the ministry of reconciliation, the very reconciliation that we've been given, and He gives us that. And it's been a thrill over the years to walk with women through this healing process, and it is so exciting.
Oh, I'm
because
sure.
you just see them transformed.
Yes.
You know, whether it's a weekend retreat or we do 12-week studies or 8-week studies, and we're just starting virtual studies, but to see them come at the beginning of these studies with just the weight, the guilt, you can see it on their faces, and to walk out at the end of that and just be free. It's
God is so good.
Such a privilege to
God
get to
is
watch
so
that.
Good. You do have studies right now. What does a woman need to go through to find the healing? Now, I know that God can do something immediately on the spot, but there's more to what He wants to do. What does that look like for a woman who would be interested in being free?
Right. I tell, especially pastors, I like to tell, this is not a 1 John 1:9 Band-Aid kind of situation. And I love God's word, and 1 John 1:9 is so powerful. But I mean that in a way that I think often in the church we say, well, you're forgiven. Just go on. Just forget about it. This is not just a scratch. This is a deep wound.
Right.
That has wounded us, and it's surgery. So it is a process that you have to go through. And the two main issues really are the guilt and then the grief.
Oh, yes.
And many women in the church have dealt with the guilt. We know how to do that, although maybe not as deeply as they need to.
Yeah.
Again, because you need to look at full on. But they have not addressed the grief.
Yes.
And I think that's why
and that
we
is
have...
a process that you must go through.
It is a process, and we have churches full of people that have that abortion pain still in their life. It still hurts to touch it.
Yeah.
Every time the pastor is doing his sermon on abortion for the year, or it still hurts.
Yeah.
Mother's Day, I didn't go to Mother's Day church on Mother's Day for years because it still hurt. Because I dealt with the guilt.
Yeah.
But not necessarily the grief. And especially as mothers, but as fathers too, there's that loss.
Yeah.
And so we actually walk women through both of those things, through God's Word.
That's good.
The power of God's Word. And right now I'm doing a virtual group, and I've got one gal in there that doesn't know the Lord at all. Wow. And it's just, what an evangelistic tool, because you're dealing with guilt. And a holy God, and how can He forgive me for this? So it's a beautiful evangelistic tool for those that don't know the Lord, but for those that know the Lord too.
Yeah.
To come into a deeper understanding of what His forgiveness really means.
Now, if somebody wants to go through one of those programs, how do they do that?
Locally, we have in-person groups. There are also virtual groups that we are doing I've got one right now. I've got a gal in Ohio and one in Arizona, so it makes it available
That's
to
great.
anyone. We can plug them in.
And where can they find that? www dot
Yes, an even place,
and
an even place.
okay.
.com is one of the virtual groups. Supportafterabortion.com is another one
Oh.
that has great referrals to groups all over the country. Locally, we've got setfreegroups.com that they can plug
Which
into.
locally is Middle Tennessee, would
Middle
we say?
Tennessee.
Okay.
And we can also refer them on to anywhere in the country where they are, wherever you are. If you've got this pain, don't be alone. I mean, one of the things about abortion is that it isolates us.
Yes.
It separates us. We feel like we're the only ones struggling with this stuff, but you're not. This is common, and you don't have to go it alone. There are people available that can help walk you through that healing process.
That's great. Now, one of the other things that I just love is that you are involved with a memorial wall. Tell us real quick a little bit about that.
Okay, this is in Chattanooga, but it is national. We've got people involved from all over the country. When I was the director of the Pregnancy Center in Chattanooga, we were across the street from an abortion clinic.
Oh, wow.
For 18 years, over 36,000 babies died at that location. And back in the 90s, God miraculously gave us that building.
Wow.
We didn't know why or how or if
Talk
we
about
even
redemption.
really wanted it. But exactly, we figured out that he was redeeming that ground where the innocent blood was shed. And so we have a 50-foot granite wall and on the very spot where those abortions were done.
Wow.
And we have invited anyone nationwide that would like to honor their child. This is part of that grieving we're talking about, to be able to give dignity to that child. For men, it's powerful because they are reclaiming their position as the father of that baby. For families, grandparents put up name plaques. But there's over 3,000 little name plaques with a name, verses, dates. And
Beautiful.
it is so powerful when you walk down and read it. It just puts a whole new face on abortion.
Yeah.
It shows the pain,
Yeah.
but it also shows the healing because most of those plaques have a message of forgiveness as well.
Great.
So
great. I love
that's
that.
part of that healing process.
How do people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you, whether it's for a group or for something else?
Can I give my personal number? I'd be glad to do that.
Sure.
Okay.
Don't give your address, but you can give your phone number.
I would love to talk to anyone who is dealing with this, and I can get you referred in and networked in, no matter where you are in the country. And my number is 931-797-3396.
That's great. I do want to mention here, this is from one of your websites. It's for women who've had abortions, if they experience XYZ, that it might be something that they need to, find forgiveness and get help and maybe do one of your groups. I just want to mention some of these. Some of the symptoms, shall we say: guilt, anger, depression, fear that others will find out that they had an abortion, grief and frequent crying, addictions, destructive and compulsive behaviors, relationship problems, flashbacks, nightmares, attempted suicide. And I just looking at the list the first time, I thought, man, there are so many of these that are on here that people would just push it to the side and say nothing to do with abortion.
They don't see it related at all. Yeah.
But you see that.
Oh, absolutely.
Over and over and over. Will you just take a minute and speak to some of the women who are experiencing this and give them the hope that they need today?
It will come out somewhere. Again, that beach ball or holding under at the pool takes a lot of emotional energy to keep it down. And God doesn't like anything in the darkness. He wants to bring it up and bring it in the light and do that in a safe place. But it will impact. It impacts relationships. I have some homeschool mom friends who it affects our relationships with later on children. We either have trouble connecting, or sometimes we're the hover moms, we're the helicopter moms, because we're afraid that God's going to punish our children for what we did. It affects marriage. I just had a gal last year that went through one of our groups, and she didn't even see marriage as an issue, but there was some anger there. towards men. And when we dealt with it, she said, I have a new marriage.
Oh.
Because we went back and dealt with the abortion, and she had never related to those two things. I had another gal that's an elder's wife in our church that went through just because somebody else needed it. She didn't really need it, but she was coming with this other gal so that she would come to group. And she said it transformed so many areas of her life. So, yeah, the anger is going to come out somewhere, which is part of the grieving process, the depression, the relationship issues, and addictions. We've had gals that were involved in cutting and going back to the abortion, dealt with it. We do groups in Christian recovery centers. The first one we did, I had 5 women in there. And after the first night, 4 of them said, we have been in and out of recovery for years. And nobody has ever dealt with this abortion issue. And we know that it is the root where it all started.
So there is hope.
As they go back and deal with the root, so much changes.
There is hope.
There is hope. There is healing. I say that, this is something that needs surgery in our lives. God needs to get that cancer out, and He's the good surgeon. Our abortions are never going to go away. But now I've got a scar instead of the wound.
That's good.
And it doesn't hurt to touch anymore. That's how you know when you're healed.
That is so good.
When God asks you to talk to somebody else about it, it doesn't hurt to touch because it gives glory to what He can do and the healing that He can give.
That is so good. If you have been in that position, God can heal you. He can set you free. And I would highly encourage you to get in touch with Linda. You can do any of the groups, setfree.com. What was the virtual one, the address?
AndEvenPlace.com.
AndEvenPlace.com.
So no matter where you are, we can get you into a virtual group. Absolutely.
I highly recommend that.
It's a safe place. A safe place to let that beach ball come up and let God deal with it.
So good. I'm so glad you came today, Linda. Thank you so much. Your message, your story has been powerful. And if you've been through an abortion, there is hope. Get in touch with Linda, go through the program, but talk to the Lord and ask for His forgiveness, and He will set you free. And follow that up with the programs that she has. And there are many others in the nation as well,
Yes.
but I highly recommend Linda's. We are going to get down to the nitty-gritty of the Q&A. Thank you, Linda, for being with us. You have been a blessing so far already. All right, well, let's talk about abortion. How prevalent is abortion? How many, what are the numbers? Do we have any percentages, or do we know if it's a lot of women, or are we on the downside with abortions?
Some states are down, but the overall is over 50 million. And you can't get your head around that. Of course, Roe versus Wade was reversed last year. It was going to be the 50th anniversary that we had legalized abortion pretty much all the way through pregnancy, all over the country. Wow. And as you mentioned, we don't really have statistics on how many, because they've tried to do studies, and women that they know had abortions won't say that they did, so it's very hard to research. But we're looking at least 1 out of 4 women. And
That's
again,
a quarter of all women,
absolutely.
And probably more.
Probably more.
Wow.
That will have an abortion sometime in their lifetime. And of course, for every mother, there was a father and grandparents. And so it ripples out and touches. There's the girlfriend in college that took her. It just has touched so many people.
Yeah. And yet there are so few ministries in the church for women or men that have been part of abortion. Interesting.
Yeah, the church it's kind of hard because the pastors, and this is something I try to talk to pastors about, is they feel like they know the women in their congregation that have had them, so they feel like not saying anything is protecting them because they don't want to hurt them. But what it does is the silence further isolates them and keeps them from realizing that there's some healing available and needed.
Wow. What ages do we see abortion?
Oh my. Yeah, I guess in the early days, back in the 80s when we first got started, the general idea was these are all teenage girls.
Right.
This is not the case. I've got friends that were married at the time. They had other children for whatever reason, or they just got divorced. It is across the span. Of course, most pregnancies are going to be, really in 20s, 20s and 30s would be most of them. But the thing is now with 50 years of abortion, we now have women in their 80s
Yeah.
that had
That had one
abortions.
back when.
And it's generational now. You have girls coming in that we're working with that are saying, well, my mom had an abortion and my grandma had an abortion. They said it's good enough for them. That's what I should do.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because sometimes now they're going, I don't want that. Because they've seen how it has impacted their mothers.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So are the statistics the same in church as they are in not church people?
I wish I could say that it was different,
It is the same.
but it's pretty much the same. Pretty much the same.
What are the reasons women get abortions?
That's a great question. Of course, it varies tremendously. Well, I can't say usually. Many times, it's the father of the baby either pushing them, or she just doesn't want to have to continue to relate to him. If she has the baby, it's going to be the father of a baby forever, and does not want to be involved with that person anymore. Of course, you've got a lot of parents really pushing abortion.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. Especially if the moms that have had abortion, they said it's good enough for me, and they think they're protecting the woman. So it varies just completely across the board. A really dramatic quote, though, that has stuck with me through the years is that women don't choose abortion like you choose to get a new hairstyle or something. It's not a casual thing in most cases. Although there are some that do use it for birth control, that have, we're now looking at a generation that has never not known abortion readily available.
Yeah.
So there are some. But women don't choose abortion like a new hair do. They choose abortion like an animal caught in a trap will choose to chew its own leg off.
Oh, wow.
And I know that's a very dramatic statement, but I think it captures really how many women feel. They feel trapped.
Yeah.
They feel like they don't have a choice, which is so ironic because the abortionists call it being pro-choice.
Yeah.
But many women feel like they have no other choice. I have one good friend whose stepfather, was sexually abusing her as a teenager. And what abortion did was allowed him to take her to the abortion clinic, abort, and continue doing what he's doing. You've got you're trafficking people. They're being forced to have abortions. So it just allows the perpetration of these evils to go on because it covers up.
Yeah. How far along are abortions performed?
Most early trimester abortions can be done between 6 and usually about 12 weeks of pregnancy. That's the suction abortions, they were called. But Roe versus Wade basically made it legal up through birth if the doctor would say that it was for the woman's mental health.
Oh, for mental health?
Yes.
Oh, I thought physical health, but now we're saying mental health.
Yes, Doe versus Bolton, which was the companion decision to Roe versus Wade, said for a woman's health, she could have an abortion all the way through pregnancy, and then they interpreted that as including mental health.
Interesting.
And unfortunately, we have people legitimately advocating that a baby should not be declared a human until 2 weeks after birth.
I've heard that. And
that if a woman decides that she really doesn't want it, the baby can go ahead and be killed.
It's like, well, what is supposed to happen after the baby's born? I cannot even get my head around this.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy.
And of course, in many states now, we do have some states that are protecting and putting limits like 15 weeks. I think a couple states have, or 12 weeks, putting some sort of limits on it. But other states, it's still totally wide open.
What kind of abortions are there? You mentioned one there, and I know there are others.
Most of the early trimester abortions are either a suction abortion, or now over 50% of the abortions are chemical abortions. And this is where a doctor or Planned Parenthood are prescribing. It's 2 pills. They take 1 pill. that basically stops the development of the baby, and then the next day they take a second pill that causes the baby to pass.
And that's from home?
That is from home.
Whew.
And one of the things with working with women in abortion recovery is we can be triggered very much by being in a GYN office or whatever.
Yeah.
And the place where we had our abortions is always a trigger and a painful place. I have one friend that would really go into depression anytime she'd drive by the Planned Parenthood clinic where she had her abortion. But now what we're doing, by sending these women home, they're delivering in their bathrooms. They're passing in the bathrooms. I work on a hotline, and we get calls from women that are in tears holding. And now we have the situation where they haven't seen a physician. They don't know how far along they are. Nobody's doing an ultrasound to say this baby is actually, 15 weeks instead of 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And so they're holding the remains of their baby in their hand going, what do I do with it? Oh. And they're told at the abortion clinics to flush it. And they can't bring themselves to do it. So we have opened up a huge new can of worms.
Yeah.
And huge trauma for these women that are doing this all by themselves at home, alone, with no one to support them.
Wow. You have to wonder about how dangerous that is even for the mother, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Especially if they're further along, then this type of abortion, the chemical abortion, is much more dangerous to the mother than what we had in the abortion clinics.
Interesting.
Yes.
Always coming up with something. So sad. So sad. Do they ever, we're talking about being dangerous for the woman at home. Do the abortion procedures, do they ever go wrong? Is that something that is a thing?
It is definitely a thing. Carol Everett, who ran an abortion clinic, talked about how they would have the ambulances not come to the front door but the back door so that nobody knew what was going on. And most of it's under the table. They're not going to report that. But I've had many women who are infertile. We have women through our groups all the time that have not been able to have other babies because of the scar tissue that blocks the fallopian tube.
Yeah, that's one I've heard a lot of.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of other things that can go wrong and happen. Yes. Not to mention, of course, the emotional and spiritual.
Right.
Right.
And those are huge. Those are definitely huge. So there are obviously risks involved in that. How much does a person who walks into a clinic to have an abortion, how much do they really know about what's about to happen?
I talked to a woman on the phone yesterday who was telling me that she went in and she didn't want it, and they said, well, here, just take this. This will calm your nerves. And they gave her Valium and then pushed her right on through the system. Women are lied to. They're deceived. They're manipulated. I have another gal that's in one group right now that was taken to an abortion clinic. This was years ago, but they asked her, do you want this? And she said, no, I don't. She was a teenager at the time. And they called her mother in, and her mother went to hit her and actually drew her arm back to hit her. And she gave in and went ahead and had the abortion because her mother was pushing. So I've watched in front of abortion clinics, women lock the doors and have the boyfriend or whoever come around and unlock it, and her go back and forth trying to not get out of the car. So there's a great deal of manipulation and pressure on many women.
I had no idea that was such a thing, that people were really forcing them to have it. I can understand certain situations, but what surprises me is that the family, the parents would do that. But you say that's
and they're not evil. They're not. Abortion is so accepted in our society. We've been told that it's not a baby, and here's their daughter, and they see her in pain, they want to make it go away. But they don't realize that it's not going to make it go away. Abortion does not undo that pregnancy. Which is true even in the situation of rape. We've dealt with women who the pregnancy was a result of rape, and they had abortions, and they consistently say that the abortion was more traumatic than the rape.
Really?
Because she had no choice in the rape. But she had a choice in the abortion.
Wow. That's interesting because that is a biggie that we hear a lot about.
Sure.
You know, that and for a child who's being sexually abused and raped, that they need to because, you know, that the circumstances. But these women are saying that's not necessarily the
Because
case.
the abortion can be more traumatic. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you have any stories of children who have gone through this?
Well, my friend that I mentioned, whose stepfather was abusing her, of course, she had no choice in the abortion either.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but the thought of those children is actually, you know, the grief over those children is more traumatic than what was done to her physically. Yeah.
And there is healing for those who have experienced it so very young.
Yeah.
That's encouraging.
It's deep. It's deep. It's not an easy process, but God is so good and can redeem any pain in our lives if we will give it to Him and get the right counseling.
So for somebody who may just be watching here and they're considering an abortion, what they know this, but tell us who are maybe on the sidelines who are watching or dealing with this with a friend or a family member, what does it look like for them as they're considering having an abortion?
Well, I understand. I understand the pain, the panic, the numbness sometimes that we can feel. Your situation is tough, or you wouldn't be considering that. But having walked through it with many women, knowing in the end that you gave that child life, whether you end up parenting or putting that child into another situation where they're going to be loved and cared for, that's something you can live with. But living with the fact that that baby existed and you made that choice to end its life is much harder to deal with in the end.
So what are the options if they're struggling with abortion for whatever reason that they just don't want to keep the baby? What options do they have?
Well, of course, parenting is one, and adoption is another major one. A lot of women say, well, I can never give my baby away. But to me, a woman that is not in a position to raise a child, but loves that child enough to put it into a situation where it can be loved and cared for is a huge sacrifice of love. And there are also today, I mean, adoption is not what it used to be either. There's fostering. There can be a time where there's some great Christian organizations that can care for that baby until you can get to where you are able to care for it. So today there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of people out there that are willing to help and walk through you, whether it's the financial issues or relationship issues. You know, often you don't want to be tied to that man, but there are options where you don't have to be. You don't have to claim him as the father.
Interesting.
Which then he has no legal rights. So there's all kinds of opportunities and options out there to be able to give that child life.
Interesting. Now, for someone who's had an abortion,
Yes.
and they are struggling with all the things of grief and shame and guilt, and which we talked about in the Real Life with Ruth McD, the show that we actually did right before this, the guilt, anger, depression, crying, fear that others will find out. These are just some of the, for lack of a better term, symptoms that we talked about.
Right.
Relationship problems, flashbacks, nightmares, that kind of thing. For someone who's had an abortion, what would you say to them?
Don't keep it a secret. Things that are in secret in the dark rot. They're not pretty. And you're not alone. Most of us at some level experience some of these things. So don't isolate. There is help available. There are those of us that have been through it and walked through it and found healing, found peace, found forgiveness. And that's available to you as well. But I encourage you to reach out and allow someone to walk alongside with you. We serve a God that can redeem anything
Amen.
and forgive anything because he paid the ultimate price. And you can walk free. And you could actually come out stronger at the end for having walked that process.
What does the Lord say about the unborn?
That they are made in his image. He has made each one of us, including each one of you, unique. What a God that can do that with millions of people. But there's no one exactly like you. There's no DNA exactly like you. And he loves us. He formed us in the womb. Not just your baby, but you. He made you in the womb. Knowing ahead of time every decision that you were going to make in your life. He knew that already. That's why he went to the cross before you were born. So he loves the unborn. I believe that those of us that have asked Jesus for forgiveness will see our children in heaven someday.
Yes. Yes.
King David, after he sinned with Bathsheba and killed her husband to cover up his sin, and then his baby died.
Yeah.
When they told him that the baby was dead, he said, I cannot bring that baby back, but someday I will go to him.
That's powerful.
And I think that's our promise, that they are in God's arms. We can have peace. We can give them dignity and honor. I love to say that we can't take back our decision to have an abortion, but we can take back the decision not to love that child. And we can make room in our hearts for him or her.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So, someone who has had an abortion, can they be free?
Yes. You know, it won't ever undo the abortion. It won't ever undo the fact that we didn't get to hold that child and raise that child, even though we're going to see him someday. We can't undo that. But it doesn't have to hurt to touch that wound anymore.
Oh, yeah.
We can heal. And now it's a scar that I can hold up and say, Jesus did this. He healed me. And it doesn't hurt to touch. And that's the hope.
That's great. Would you just pray for someone who's listening who is hurting from having an abortion? Would you pray with them?
I would love to. Oh God, you are so good.
Yes.
Lord Jesus, you said that you came to heal the brokenhearted. You came to give us beauty for ashes, joy for mourning. You said, blessed are those that mourn. So Lord, those that are hurting right now, that are listening to my voice, you know them. You're right there in the room with them wherever they are. I pray that you would give them the courage to face you, to confess, and to receive the forgiveness that you bought for them on the cross.
Yes.
I pray that they would know that they are not alone, that there are many, many of us that have walked this journey. And God, that there are many, many more that need to walk this journey. And that you can even use them to help others as they heal. You are so good and so amazing. So Lord, right now, I pray that you would touch them, you would be in that room with them. Lord, I pray your word would come alive to them. And if they don't know your word, Lord, you guys just go to Psalm 32 and 51 that King David wrote because of his murdering and his child dying. And there it says that you can be washed white as snow.
Yes.
That when we cover our iniquity, Lord, it rots our bones. But when we confess it to you, that you heal, you forgive, and you restore joy. And we ask that for each one today that is listening. In Jesus' precious name.
Amen. Amen. Before we wrap it up, you mentioned something earlier about the person who took them to the abortion clinic.
And sometimes there can be some real guilt in that too.
And that's what I want just to talk about for just a minute, whether it's a friend or a boyfriend or even a husband
Yeah.
or a parent, another family member, what would you say to that person?
That you need to walk through that same process. Mm-hmm. You need to acknowledge your part in that abortion, in the death of that child, and confess that to the Lord and be forgiven as well. Don't carry that guilt. Confess it, and He will forgive it.
So good, so good. I'm so glad that you are with us today. Tell us how people can get in touch with you, whether they want to go to your group. You have local groups for women who've had abortions.
Right.
You also have a virtual group, and you do some work with churches as well. If someone wants to get connected with you, how would they do that?
Okay. We can go to setfreegroups@gmail.com. If you'd like to send me an email, or setfreegroups.com is our webpage, and there's some contact information there. We would love to be able to help refer you wherever you are in the country. We have got people that are there ready to walk you through it, or to go virtually through the healing process.
That's great.
It's powerful.
That's great. Yes, and you have quite a ministry. A lot of people are being healed and set free, and God is blessing. And that's what it's all about in the end. It's winning souls for the Lord, but making sure those souls live free.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a good thing.
You know, Jesus talks about the harvest. And what Satan means for evil, God can use for
Yes.
good. And we have a culture where 1 out of 4 people are carrying this wound. And we have the answer.
Yeah.
The church needs to be addressing it. We have the answer.
Yes.
And we need to be coming not with a shaking finger or condemnation, but with love to reap that mighty harvest that I believe is white and ready.
So good. Thank you, Linda, for being here.
Thank you, Ruth.
And thank you all for being with us today. And there's been a lot of good stuff in here. Please share this with people you know that could benefit from hearing Linda's story. You all have a great week. We'll see you next time.